possible during the course of the Q&A session. So without further ado, let me take a moment to introduce my co-panelists here. It gives me immense pleasure today to welcome, first of all, Scott Rohrer. Scott leads our work-at-home business at Tech Mahindra. And for most of his career, he has dedicated himself to design, implementation, operationalizing the work-at-home contact centers. Scott's passion for over 20 plus years has been really achieving better results for his clients using geographically distributed operating models. A great portion of the growth that he's brought about is through the work-at-home business here. And he has 19 plus years of experience, both in operations, sales experience across multiple customer verticals. All right, so without further ado, let me start with probably the first question of the day, and hopefully Edwin and Scott, you can hear me okay? Give me a quick thumbs up if you can. All right, perfect. I can see a couple of nods there. All right, so Edwin, maybe I can start with you. And of course, the big question on probably a lot of our minds.
I'm sorry, I froze for a minute there. You can all hear me, I believe.
Good.
Seen what really transpired over the last 3 years and having seen the market at close quarters, where would you believe we are now as an industry in terms of working from home?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, it's been a common question that has been asked over and over again. And today, if you look at the current situation, we still have, COVID very much in most parts of the world, in fact, and we still see thousands of people that are working remotely. And in fact, when you look at last 3 years, a lot has changed, specifically when I look at a home environment, right? When you talk about, kitchen bar tables, talk about dining tables, talk about living room couches, patios, all of these areas at some point have become office desks. And many continue to operate in that environment. And today it's estimated that about 30% of COVID-based work-at-home employees are still working from home, with pretty much no plans to go back to a physical site. Many organizations that deployed employees from home during the worst part of pandemic back in 2020, 2021, have struggled to get employees to shift back to physical sites after, getting into a situation where they've been working remotely for so long. And so companies with contact centers are finding themselves having to offer a work from home option in addition to a work from office option. That has become more of a mandate, you could say, and keeping the associates and employees is important. So in order to maintain low attrition, companies are basically having to be extremely flexible and kind of trying to figure out giving that option to the employees where they wish to work. And work at home models are very much accepted today, basically due to the push to work from home during COVID, where pretty much most of the organizations, or I should say pretty much all the organizations, are pretty much now used to working from home. At some point were forced to adapt to that situations. And the organizations and businesses that outsource their customer service are open to including work at home operations in at least as a portion of their overall solution. And as we go beyond COVID, Working from home will always be considered as a viable option. However, resources that were deployed remotely during the COVID period, in most cases labeled as hybrid, will continue to get smaller is what we anticipate. And so, when you look at the hybrid model, which will sort of come and go, we see a very bright future with work from home contact centers, but with a slightly different operating model than what we've seen so far in hybrid. I hope that answers the question that you had there.
Thank you, Edwin, and sorry for that little technical glitch. I was unable to unmute myself. Well, one of the banes of probably trying to work virtually. But anyway, so before I come to you, Scott, and probably ask you my first question, I would be amiss if I don't actually mention the contribution, the role that our families and friends and people who we stay with at homes played in the course of this whole work at home setup, right? I mean, personally for me, whether it be working on the same roof with my spouse in the other room, or trying to share the same bandwidth with my child, trying to do, the classes and school homeworks. It was quite a battle of sorts. But I think, at the end of the day, what work at home has metamorphed into is probably a harmonious situation where work happens, work-life balance happens, but more importantly, employees at large are probably able to pick and choose times which work most effectively for them and make them most efficient in their day-to-day jobs. So on that note, Scott, let me probably shift the attention to you. And you've obviously been an expert in this industry for many, many years, right? And you probably started thinking of this magical mantra of work at home and virtual working when people were still trying to build their offices in brick and mortar. So over the years, what are the different work at home models that you really observed which exist today or may have existed in the past, obviously from a contact center perspective? And how would you really differentiate it for the layman? Like, is work at home all the same, or are there differences?
Yeah. Thanks, Anirban. That's one of my very favorite questions, to answer. So let me take a few minutes. If you study the contact center business, particularly today, right, as we're coming out of COVID, you'll observe that there are two, distinct work at home operating models that are present today across all contact centers, both captive and the outsourced space. And the first is by far the most popular. It's the one we hear the most about, right? You heard Edwin talk about it. You heard Anirban talk about it. You hear it called the hybrid model. But prior to COVID, the industry called it hub and spoke, which I think is a far more reflective term as people, employees, resources are hanging off or are tethered to a hub office, physical center. In this model, as we all know now, employees are generally required to travel to the site, for things like training, onboarding, performance reviews, and so forth, right? So it's difficult to get away from the site. They've got to stay nearby the site for those things. There's one positive model or attribute about this model, which is the ability, for the agents to either work from the office or from the home. So if you have a pandemic, you have a weather situation, you have an emergency, you have both of those options that's available. And so, lots of companies do a lot of this hybrid hub and spoke type model. The downside to this is it usually leverages the physical hub-based technologies and processes, right? Because usually these things are built for physical teams. They're built for in-person learning. They're built for on-site processes. And so oftentimes those tools and processes are used in the work at home business, which is much different. And so the tools and processes end up not being suited for the task, and challenges arise. People struggle. and sometimes you have greater attrition because of that model. So therefore, at best, at the end of the day, what we're here for is agent level performance. And so, because it's the same people in the site and the same technologies, performance is often neutral in this model, or it falls below, the performance of the current site. The second model, which is far more mature, which is what I'm very excited to talk about, is the geographically distributed, or the pure play model, or really we call it the fully virtual work at home model today. It's much more rare because it's much more difficult to execute. What you have to do is you have to virtualize your business from end to end and not use the traditional tools and processes that you have around the sites, in order for it to really, really be effective. This type of model really began, in the late 1990s, when the internet first came out, and it has evolved from there. And many of the larger BPO firms and IT firms have sort of picked up the model. And due to the expansion, really, of high-speed internet, the model was over a decade ago, able to begin to really leverage geography in the favor of its clients by hiring employees that were geographically dispersed. You've heard, working from anywhere. Now, because of this unlimited footprint, the ability to hire people from anywhere, unlimited pools of resources, could then be tapped into, which meant acquiring, higher quality talent, which would really be an inherency to the business. And since then, this approach on hiring people located anywhere, coupled with a focus on remote worker engagement, right? We hear a lot of discussion about engagement, adult learning, and software design specifically for at-home workers, has really accelerated the virtual contact center business into the future. Again, one, by improving client key performance metrics. Again, basically, if you're able to achieve a little bit better people, a little bit higher quality because of your distributed model, you should be able to perform better. And secondly, and we haven't talked a lot about this, but greater inherent flexibility in the work at home model. There's an inherent flexibility if you do it right within the work at home model, with the staffing and the ability to staff up and down for seasonal business as well as intraday business. And finally, a lower cost to the end customer due to the factors we mentioned, right? There's no physical brick and mortar, and so those costs go away. So though the fully virtual work at home approach has been around for over 2 decades, kind of the one that I just described, the fully virtual model, largely the big box BPOs and others are operating the hub and spoke model still today, so that it's still very rare to see somebody executing the distributed model properly. And that's where Tech Mahindra, by the way, is different, right? As you now have heard from our deep experience in this space, we now understand and have built and have successfully scaled our fully virtual work at home business globally. And so that's our pursuit going forward, is to educate and help our clients and prospects, achieve a truly transformational work at home result. Anirban, I'll pass it back to you.
Perfect. No, and thank you. There was a little bit of a lag there, Scott, but I think that's fascinating. I learned something today, right? I mean, the fact that there are these two very distinct ways of defining or following work at home. I guess, the interesting bit is probably a large majority of us, including myself, I must confess, think of hybrid as probably the work at home model. But what's very important is, the whole pure play version, or the real virtual setup that I know has been brought to the fore by Tech Mahindra is fascinating, because what it really does, to your point, Scott, is bring a lot of inherent benefits both to the individual as well as to the end customer by the multiple benefits that you just highlighted. So thank you for
Exactly.
that. Just building on that, and Edwin, if I may just kind of bounce back to you, you've obviously been at the forefront of talking about some of these value propositions from a work at home standpoint that Tech Mahindra offers, and go and talk to customers about it, sell some of the best practices and outcomes, showcase the solutions, the art of the possible, and so on and so forth, right? So from your perspective, can you talk about, or maybe give some examples of how some of these best practices and outcomes are being deployed or are being talked to our multiple clients?
Yeah, absolutely, Anirban and Scott. I loved your response there, differentiating very clearly, what is a hybrid model versus what you called a dispersed model, right? And we've in fact leveraged the distributed or geographically dispersed hiring model that taps onto significant pool of talent. When you look at a hybrid model, you're basically limiting the resources that are available out there. But the moment you look at a geographically dispersed model, the pool availability is immense, and thus the quality of resources that you're able to pick from and choose, it goes up significantly. And ultimately the end result of it is it does have a positive impact on your client key performance matrix as well. And in fact, by bringing home-based workers online quickly, we're able to better respond to changing demand on a daily or a seasonal basis without hiring for specific peak hours. And in fact, employing remote agents allows us to be nimble and responsive in keeping our business going in the face of, think of it as a natural disaster or other crisis for that matter. And when a crisis does occur, we see that calls could be quickly routed to our work at home businesses very, very quickly. And by using remote agents, we're able to actually take advantage of a variety of workers that may not be able to work full time in a formal contact center. Think of it as parents, students, disabled workers, retirees for that matter. One of the things that we've been able to do very, very effectively with a large portion of our clients is revisit our BCP strategy as well, and enabling that component of quickly turning on the work at home solution for cases where we are currently operating in office has turned out to be very, very beneficial as well. And without the loss of any hours or any business continuity for that matter. And we've been able to very, very effectively manage that at this point in time. And in fact, our work at home programs utilize part-time schedules that contain multiple start and stop times within the same day, which actually provides a better staffing solution for volatile interaction traffic patterns. And think of it as a retailer for that matter. Today a lot of retailers struggle to clearly forecast at an interval level what the volumes are going to be because of changing patterns. And that's where this kind of a model comes in very, very handy, when you have first 4 hours of the day where you have a work from home agent who's enabled, and probably 4 hours down the line, the remaining 4 hours is then completed towards the later part of the day because of the demand that is coming in those hours. In addition, when you look at the network infrastructure and security behind our remote solution, we are industry leading, allowing you to be assured that your work and your data are also safe. And additionally, our work at home environment leverages a secure cloud-based virtual desktop solution to ensure encrypted and authenticated connectivity to the client data as well. Our work from home solution also aligns with our omni-channel approach, primarily when we look at it more from a customer experience standpoint, as we look at supporting voice, chat, text, email, and social channels as well. So it's been very, very effective overall in how we have looked at the entire work from home strategy, ensuring that we are able to reap the benefits of what work from home brings. And we truly believe that if you limit yourself to that hub and spoke model that Scott talked about, it kind of takes away the key benefits that you see from a dispersed model. And thus, our focus really has been to ensure that we're able to build out that dispersed model, ensure that we have the right recruitment engines as well to be able to onboard resources from various regions spread out, and also ensuring that we have the right tools in place from a training standpoint to ensure that we're able to train them remotely and then bring them into the production phase as well.
Fantastic. I mean, I'm almost thinking, as you've rattled off a whole bunch of pluses and, leading edge technology, if I may call it that. I mean, it's no surprise in terms of the success that this entire program has received, as well as it's been welcomed with open arms by multiple clients across multiple geographies. And in fact, and Scott, I will come back in just a second. But, as we've been coming out of the COVID phase, and a lot of companies are debating whether they should continue with work at home, whether they should be hybrid, whether it should be fully virtual, and so on and so forth. What's very interesting is there's this continuous debate around, is it secure enough? Is technology going to, play a dampener in terms of network connectivity and speed, etc.? Are we going to be able to watch over our agents and monitor their performance on a regular basis as compared to a shop floor where, you could pretty much walk up and down the aisle? As well as the fact that, in many quarters, there's this debate around, is it really possible to get 10, 20, 50, 100, maybe 200 people recruited and resourced at short notice in a work at home environment? Because really you don't have control over how you interview them, how you onboard them, how you train them, and so on and so forth. So Scott, and on that note, if I may just, kind of bring you back in, and maybe it's a myth, maybe it's a fact, but demystify it for us. If I was to ask you, Scott, there's this debate saying work at home setup takes longer. It's difficult to find people. Data security issues are there. We don't know how to train people. Is that a myth, or do you want to bust that myth?
It's not a myth because I think in today's people model, as everybody knows, it's very hard to find people. Different global economies, particularly in the Americas, it has been very difficult to find people, but we've not really seen that really on our side, again, because of our dispersed hiring footprint. For instance, we hire in 48 states here in the US, and so you could see the advantage we would have in our hiring over someone that had a great physical site that might be located in one city in one state. So it's not a myth, but it's not something that can easily be busted by everybody, because many folks are tethered once again to their physical sites, and they haven't expanded their footprint from a hiring perspective. So they're still seeing the same problems.
Do you have examples of, I don't know, mini or major ramp ups in short periods of time, and how did you actually do that?
Yeah, let me share a few of our successes, and before I do, just a little bit of background on some of the TechM work at home programs. I think Edwin and you've already mentioned, we've got work at home programs across all vertical businesses and across all business types in terms of customer service, sales, tech support, front office work, back office work. We handle inbound calls, outbound, chats back, we do claims, we do content review, we do data entry. So any of those things that you would see in the customer service or the contact center space, customer experience space, are all great fits. A few of the vertical businesses that we're heavy in, would be financial services, as well as retail and consumer products. We have a number of technology programs, healthcare programs. Our technology stack is fully HIPAA compliant and PCI compliant. So we do a lot of healthcare work, again, as well as retail work, financial services, travel and hospitality. And we do a fair amount of government work as well, again, because of our inherent ability to ramp up and down quickly, and flex our staff. So to give you a few examples, as you asked, for FEMA, during the disaster, this is our largest. We ramped 750 ambassadors in 5 weeks. Our frontline agents, we give it a slightly different name. We call them ambassadors, but that's 750 in 5 weeks, right? Which is very difficult to do around a physical site. For CDC, again, another government client, we were able to ramp 500 in 4 weeks. For the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, we ramped 450 in 4 weeks. For one of our financial services programs where we do loan origination, processing, and services, we ramped to 400 people in a month. For one of our medical clients, we ramped up a benefits enrollment program and hired 350 in 3 weeks. And for the Census Bureau, 500 in 3 weeks. So those are just a few of the hyper ramps. Those ramps also ramp down, and so we have the ability to ramp up and ramp down and be flexible in that regard. In addition, Anirban, we launched a large financial services client, a large manufacturing client, and a large gaming client earlier in this year into our work at home model. And of course, we're, as I mentioned, the model is global. It's very scaled across the Americas. That is South America, North America, Canada, and we're growing, in areas like Europe and APAC, South Africa, and Australia.
Fascinating. And I wouldn't have guessed, 300, 400, 700 were being hired in under a couple of months. I mean, that is incredible. So let me ask you a question. On one hand, we have these 300s, 400s, 700s that are being hired. If you have a smaller program, maybe 10 FT, 15 FT, 20 FT, is it any different? Is it equally easy to hire those people? Is it tougher? I'm just curious. Does it make a difference, the number?
No, it doesn't make a difference. I mean, sometimes if you have a small head count, you've got to have supervisors across your hours of operations. So from a cost perspective, sometimes those are more challenging, but from a people perspective, from a recruiting perspective, a technology perspective, really no difference between a small, medium, or large program.
Yeah, and I think if I may add to what Scott said, when you look at a smaller program versus a larger program, a lot of it comes down to what is that support structure that you want to build in to ensure that you're able to support a small program vis-a-vis a larger program. For a larger program, 24/7 coverage, leadership across all of these intervals, no problem at all. When it comes to smaller programs, and that's where we make it absolutely clear to ensure that we have the right leadership support available across each of the intervals of support. Now, there could be a situation where you may come back and say, I need 10 people spread across 24/7, depending upon the complexity of the program and the challenges that we'd review, we'd want to figure out what should that leadership support structure be. And we may come back and say, okay, so for 10 people, 24/7, let's go ahead and probably look at 5 leadership resources. If from a business standpoint, that's a viable option. If not, does it make sense for us to limit the number of hours while still supporting, smaller headcounts for that matter? And we've enabled smaller programs as well in that manner, and we've been fairly successful in that model as well. But a lot of it really boils down to how do you structure the support around it so that there are resources available to answer any questions in a remote environment. In an in-office environment, it becomes easy because you raise your hand, the supervisor is right up there helping you answer any questions that you may have. And been able to build that model virtually as well from a support structure standpoint. So, and that has been one of our key strengths to ensure that the performance doesn't take a hit when you're onboarding either 10 resources or 700 resources for that matter.
Hey, and just to add to that, I think you hit on something really critical, Edwin, right? Which we've seen, which it tends to be the management style with a work at home agent tends to be more empowering. You know, you sort of say you're empowered to get done, you know, what you need to get done today, and I'll be here to support you if as needed, you know, which is much different than sort of the approach you would see in a physical site. So it's much more of an empowering approach that is needed. It's an adult learning approach. So it is a bit different.
Interesting. And that's a good point you bring up, Scott. So let me ask you a related question and delve a little bit on the training side of things. Considering people are going to be not in a quote unquote physical classroom environment, how would one ensure that, in your example, Scott, 750 people get trained in the right manner, have the right approach to dealing with customers time and time again? I'm just curious. I mean, that's a huge number to kind of train and ensure that they're all kind of doing the same thing and saying the same things.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's a two-way answer. One is ensuring in your recruiting that you're doing the proper screening and you're bringing in the right people. Believe it or not, there are different success criteria for people that want to work remotely than people that want to work from a physical site. And one of the things that, you know, should be done in the screening process is trying to identify the traits and personality dispositions of that individual, and are they going to be suited to work, you know, remotely. And then the second thing, of course, is the training curriculum itself. And you can't, as we've been talking about, just sort of WebEx a PowerPoint deck, or you will lose people. And so we take, for instance, a serious approach to converting, you know, sort of existing brick and mortar curriculum to a remote curriculum. And then our approach is to take an adult learning approach to the curriculum itself. Our average age for our work at home agents is much higher than the physical site agents that we have. So they tend to do better in an adult learning model, which is really more of a visual learning, if you will, with videos and visuals than just simple text. And so, converting, brick and mortar style trainings to fully remote type trainings is critical, in the graduation rate of those folks.
Thank you, Scott. I think that
Sure.
addresses that moot point, definitely. So Edwin, maybe coming back to you, and I'm conscious of time, maybe, one more question, then we can see if the folks on the chat who might have questions. But as you talk to different clients, Edwin, based on their flexibility or openness to the whole work at home culture, how difficult has it been to convince them culturally to say, hey, this works, not necessarily in a COVID environment only, but even otherwise, it's beneficial for both sides. And this is how the new normal should be versus trying to go back necessarily to what it was pre-COVID. So I'd love to get your sense on how have those conversations been with your end customers and clients?
So, and if you would have asked me this question about 3 years ago, I would have said extremely difficult, because convincing the security teams within each of the client organizations would have been absolute pain because, no matter how you position it, there had been difficulties in absorbing that information. But post where we are today, look at 2020, 2021, 2022, where we've now come into a space where everyone has experienced what work from home means. And that's where we see a lot of, adaptability from a lot of our clients, in fact. Some may want to look at building out a model where they say, I want some percentage of staff who should be in office, a certain percentage of staff at home, and when they say at home, one of the things that we've been able to emphasize on is if you are building out a work at home setup within the organization, we would want to build out a dispersed model because you want to enable advantages of what work from home brings. Instead of just saying, they should be coming into office at any given point in time when we ring the bell. And that has worked really, really well for us in terms of convincing the clients of the advantages. We're starting to see a number of clients saying, okay, we will keep a certain percentage of clients or certain percentage of staff in a work from home model, train them in work from home environment, and continue to run services for them in a work from home environment, enabling the supervisors who are monitoring those resources to be focused purely from a work from home standpoint as well. And in addition to that, there are instances where certain clients would want to test it out and then move forward. So we've enabled instances where we said, let's do a trial run with one batch and then start scaling them. And we've been very successful in that model as well. Plus, of course, all of our clients, in fact, I should say, would want to have BCP as work from home as well. So today, when you look at our environment, looking at about 62,000 plus resources across various locations within Tech Mahindra BPS, we have about a major portion of the resources who are continuing to work from home, and eventually we plan to have at least over 25+% of the resources who will continue to be in a remote environment, given the inclination that we've seen from a number of our clients and the success we've seen in their performance. They've been either at par with resources who are performing in office or better as well, for that matter. And a lot of it boils down to your hiring structure and how you're able to attract skilled resources, experienced resources in a work from home model.
Got it. No, that's actually quite interesting, and thank you for that. It's always, as I put it, a leader, a sales, a rainmaker is pretty much out there in the trenches trying to fight out and get the business with the clients and customers. I'm sure the conversations you've had have been ranging from interesting to debatable to complete dissonance and so on and so on. So thank you for sharing that. So for the audience, if you're on, this is the right time to start putting your questions down in the Q&A window. We will pick them up as they come along. And while we wait for questions, Scott, maybe a question for you that I actually had in my head. Obviously, COVID drove companies to start working from home, and a lot of customer service, which essentially gets provided by a lot of BPO providers like Tech Mahindra, started getting done. Now, we all know that a large proportion of customer service typically happens from locations like India, Philippines, Central Eastern Europe, and obviously in other parts of the globe, maybe a little bit in Latin America, a little bit in Europe, etc. So my question for you, Scott, really is, as you see the whole work at home ethos expanding, how do you see the global geo footprint of this really going beyond some of these obvious locations where there is already a significant BPO presence?
Yeah, good question. I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, I think the COVID pandemic has changed the face, of work at home. And so, and for instance, in our company, we have 62,000 frontline agents. That's 62,000, and we still have about 30 to 35,000 of those working remote. Some of that is still COVID based, but we expect 25 to 50% of our staff, of our frontline agent staff, to be work at home going into the future. Difficult to tell exactly what that is, but like Edwin was saying, 5-10 years ago, this would have been 2%, or it would have been 5% at most of somebody's staff. And so now we're talking about where a BPO has to have an onshore model, a nearshore model, an offshore model. It now has to have a work at home model as well. So that'll be a big part of our business, I think, going forward on into the future now.
Thank you, Scott. Very good. So I see a couple of questions popping in. So that there's a first one. It's an interesting one, and I think we briefly touched on. Maybe we can elaborate more. So the question goes: I'd imagine keeping customer data safe is even more critical in today's day and age. Wouldn't working from home create more security issues and risks associated with fraud, etc.? And how do we see more apprehensions from some clients than others? So I will come back to you, Edwin, but let me just share a couple of initial thoughts and reactions to that. So the honest answer is yes. I mean, it does become a huge topic of discussion when we start talking to potential clients, existing clients. And to the point that Scott alluded to earlier, it is very important to ensure that the work at home capability is secure, is tested, preferably in a VDI environment. And obviously, it's something that is approved by the client and customer even before we go down that path. So I think the most important thing is data security is of paramount importance. And I can say that on behalf of Tech Mahindra, that's something which we absolutely have non-negotiable standards. And we want to ensure that customer data privacy is given primary importance, in light of which we actually test our work at home solutioning. So Edwin, if I may just draw you in here to talk more, and I know you spoke briefly about it, how do you address the data security and risk related apprehensions from a customer standpoint? So this goes beyond the actual customer servicing aspect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've gotten into some very, very detailed workshops, even with the clients, to make sure that they are very, very comfortable with the infrastructure that is laid out from a work from home standpoint. You briefly talked about, setting up VDI environment, and that's primarily done to ensure that there are no data leakages from wherever, whenever the data is getting accessed. It's primarily accessed within that environment. Then there is, of course, that monitoring process in place to track down any and every deviation. So compliance monitoring and security checks to ensure that any deviation from what is being outlined is being monitored. Think of it as, be it a data moving outside of the VDI environment where a resource has access to the data, that gets flagged almost immediately. And the team at the background is quickly investigating and validating what is the data that is being moved, or somebody tried to move the data out of VDI. So there is that check and balance monitoring process in place. There is a training aspect of it from a data security standpoint, which is absolutely critical for us to ensure that every single resource is onboarded from a, be it work from home or in office environment, are going through that data security modules to ensure that they clearly understand and attest that they clearly understand overall that they cannot move the data out of the environment. Plus, of course, the controls in place from a IT standpoint to ensure that the data cannot be moved outside of that client environment. And the workshops have been really, really helpful to ensure that the clients also understand and get the assurance that the overall setup is foolproof and is safe for them to try and test it out as well. And we have projects where critical information, wherever critical information is required, you look at PCI data, PII data, we've been able to build out frameworks to ensure that all of those data points are also safeguarded, be it in a voice environment or in a data environment as well. Think of it as chats, emails, messaging for that matter. And that framework overall of covering all aspects, right from training to monitoring to continuously ensuring that we're retraining our resources to understand how critical the data points are and how critical it is to ensure that we shouldn't be taking the data out of the base environment.
Thank you, Edwin. And yeah, I mean, like I touched upon earlier, I mean, it's one of those conversations where we have to show intent as well as use case examples of how we ensure data privacy and data secrecy. So hopefully that kind of, addresses the question that was raised by Radhika there. So I have another question that's popped up, and Scott, I will draw you into, to share your thoughts on this. But Mini Gupta here is asking, some people are not much supportive in terms of helping team members and take advantage of being at home. So what are your thoughts on that? So, I mean, my reaction, Scott, and feel free to build on that, is the essence of work at home obviously will be riding a lot on trust, integrity, accountability of the individual who is actually doing the end customer service. The one point I will make, and I think this is something where we inherently try to mix matters, and probably that's where things could go wrong, is we tend to take people who are used to working in a brick and mortar environment and send them off to their homes to work virtually.
Yep.
The point that Scott mentioned earlier, and this way I'll get you in, Scott, is the competency, the skill set of people who are being hired for work at home roles only is different, because they are tuned, they are competent, they are trained to deliver and excel in the virtual environment. And for them, it's much easier to start delivering from get-go with complete integrity and trust and all of those things than somebody who's been suddenly, if I may use the word loosely, given a free day at office and you can go sit at home and do your work. It is not the same. So Scott, I'd love to get your thoughts and bring you in here.
Yeah. And no, you're right. Many people try to take advantage of working from home, right? And that's one thing. If you Google work at home, you will get a plethora of different responses. And so we have to weed through. We're very careful in those that we hire so that we don't get those folks. And then secondly, what I would say is, again, it comes down to the tools and processes that you have in place. And in our environment, we can see all of our ambassadors, all of our supervisors, all of our quality assurance folks, our HR people, our technical people are all visible on an online tool that, and much of that is on camera if we need it to be on camera. Every second, basically, of everybody's time is captured so that you can see, if somebody's not supporting, the ambassadors like they should be, it's very obvious and it's very visible. And so it's something that, you might not think that all those things can be in place in a virtual business, but they're actually in place, some of the governance and some of the checks and balances, even more so than you might see in a physical site. And so you're right, we have to be careful of those things, but I think you have to be sure you have the tools and processes in place to ensure people are being supported.
Yeah, absolutely. And Minnie, the additional point I would make there is, just like it's very important for the individual ambassador to ensure he or she is delivering on the promise, leaders on the shop floor or the virtual shop floor have to have that much additional intent as well as wisdom to be able to oversee people virtually. To Scott's point, of course, we have the use of technology and cameras and video and all of that stuff today, but it's very important as leaders to also appreciate the fact that, and this happened to me personally in one of the calls earlier today, somebody's dog actually ran into the room while this person was on video, right? I mean, you won't see that on a shop floor, obviously, but when that happened, the leader of that person actually says, oh, that's absolutely fine. Take your time, help the dog outside the room, shut the door, and just continue as if nothing really happened. And I think, well, that's just a quick example, but as leaders, we also need to ensure that we both empathize as well as understand the fact that the environment or the physical environment in a virtual setup will be different from what it is in offices. And hence we have to factor that in when it comes to work, so long as work quality and efficiency doesn't get compromised. So just conscious of time, and maybe one question that I'll throw out to both Scott and Edwin is, if you had a crystal ball, what would you peg as the percentage of work in office versus work at home 10 years from now in general in the industry?
10 years from now. Okay. 10 years from now. I would go with 75% work at home 10 years from now. I think it's just going to increase, not just in the contact center space, but across business in general.
I guess
Edwin?
given where the real estate market is headed, that percentage could be even higher for that matter. But a lot of it really boils down to all the learnings we've had over the course of last 3 years, and continue to have many more learnings. When we started off, all of a sudden getting into a situation where you have to move resources into a work from home environment, the biggest challenge that we saw early on was, how do you train? How do you ensure that they understand the processes? And I think we've overcome that challenge over the course of time, ensuring that we are able to design the right modules, ensure that we're able to also successfully look at understanding how each of the resources are performing post that training session, ensuring that they are at par from a learning curve standpoint. And all of that continues to improve over time. And again, when you look at a comparative between work in office versus work at home you could literally say is pretty much 3 years old. And work in office has existed for a very, very long period of time. And over the course of time, we've picked up at such a fast pace. And I'm hopeful that acceleration would continue to happen, and new learnings would come in, new technology would evolve. And we'd continue to see work at home adaptability growing in number year over year.
Perfect. Thank you. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, at the rate at which real estate is, starting, you could very soon, instead of, bring your own device, you could probably bring your own seat, right? Because we don't quite know where to make you sit, right? It could work down there. Anyways, I know we have literally about a minute or two left. So let me just throw a couple of quick final thoughts. And if any question comes in the middle, we'll take that as well. But as I was taking some notes through the course of our conversation, here are a few things that I did take away personally. First and foremost, clearly there are two modes or two variants of work at home. There's obviously the hybrid one, which is more popularly known, but there's also the pure play one, which while it's being driven by Tech Mahindra, I know a lot of other companies also trying to kind of come up to speed on that. Secondly, data security is going to be vitally important for the success of this mode of working. And obviously a lot will go into how technology plays with the actual individuals who are delivering the customer experience. Third, companies and teams equally have to figure out what's the best way of training people in a virtual environment to ensure that they give the best-in-class customer service. Fourth, of course, data connectivity, network, etc., will be of paramount importance, and probably that's the area of investment which companies would have to think through as they have more and more people in the virtual environment. 5, it is possible to ramp up great numbers in very quick time in the virtual environment, contrary to belief that it's going to be very difficult to get so many people at short notice. And then last but not the least, this is something which we believe is only going to grow. It is going to expand geographically into multiple areas where it's probably not as prevalent today. And the percentage could range anything from 75, 25 to even higher as we go along. So Scott and Edwin, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your candid thoughts on, I know we got some thanks from the attendees as well. So I appreciate the time you spent and sharing your wisdom and experiences with the group today. For those of you who joined us today, thank you for spending the time with us. And as we say at Tech Mahindra, in this world of virtual working, stay distant yet connected. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.